You're watching Around the World, our top global stories. First up, it's the worst weather event that New Zealand has seen in a century. Just 2 weeks after a devastating storm hit the country, Cyclone Gabrielle has now ripped New Zealand apart again.
Cyclone Gabrielle is the most significant weather event New Zealand has seen this century. The severity and the breadth of the damage that we are seeing has not been experienced in a generation. This morning we declared a national emergency for only the third time in our history.
Floods trapping people on roofs, thousands displaced and landslides destroying homes. Officials have described it as an unprecedented natural disaster. A state of emergency has been declared in New Zealand, only the third time in the country's history that an emergency has been called. The state of emergency will apply to Northland, Auckland, Bay of Plenty and Hawke's Bay. Cyclone Gabrielle has battered, in particular, New Zealand's North Island hard. Power has been cut off to 225,000 people. Hundreds of homes and people have been evacuated. Officials say that about 2,500 people have been displaced so far, but that number will increase a lot as there are still large areas that are unreachable and completely cut off, which also makes it difficult to assess the extent of damage that has been caused. New Zealand's Prime Minister Hipkins admitted that the recovery process will be a lengthy one, with many people facing extended periods of displacement.
It has been a very big night for New Zealanders across the country, but particularly in the upper North Island. I want to acknowledge the situation that New Zealanders have been waking up to this morning. A lot of families displaced, a lot of homes without power, extensive damage done across the country. It will take us a wee while to get a handle on exactly what's happened.
Residents of New Zealand's biggest city, Auckland, hunkered down as they braced for the deluge from the cyclone. It's been just 2 weeks since the record-breaking storm swamped Auckland and killed 4 people. New Zealand's Climate Change Minister James Shaw said, and I quote, "This is climate change." And this time around, even the Prime Minister was unable to immediately travel from Auckland to the capital Wellington due to the cyclone.
I want to acknowledge that this extreme weather event, one of the biggest that we have seen in recent times, probably the biggest that we have seen in recent times, comes hot on the heels of other extreme weather events that we have seen.
Much of Auckland, New Zealand's largest city, has ground to a halt as train services were cancelled, libraries and schools were closed, and authorities asked people to make only essential trips. International and domestic flights have resumed out of Auckland Airport, but the Prime Minister has warned of widespread travel disruptions and delays over the coming days. Up next, it was late at night. Students and common citizens were thronging the Michigan State University campus in the US when suddenly horror struck. At least 3 people were killed and many were injured in what was another shooting inside an educational institution in America. The suspect was found later dead from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot. Initial information relayed by the university police said that it appeared to be only one suspect, described as a short male with a mask. Later, pictures of the suspect were officially released on Twitter with a clear description. Black male, shorter in stature, red shoes, jean jacket, wearing a baseball cap that is navy with a lighter brim. Footage from the campus posted on social media showed a heavy police presence around the campus. Authorities had earlier announced that all campus activities will be cancelled for 48 hours, and eventually the police declared that the shooter had been found dead.
The suspect in this incident was located outside of the MSU campus, and it does appear that that suspect has died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It is confirmed that he is deceased.
That announcement came 4 hours after the shootings were reported, first at Berkeley Hall and then nearby at the MSU Union, a popular hub frequented by students. Soon after, the shelter-in-place order was also lifted for students. Moving on, miraculous rescues continued even a week after the deadly quakes in Turkey and Syria. The death toll has now climbed past the 36,000 mark, and it's one of the worst calamities in the region's history. Advanced technology to locate survivors is now being used as the window for survival shuts tight. CCTV footages released by the police show the moments when the earthquake hit the city of Diyarbakir in Turkey a week ago. Buildings crumbling down, lamp posts and signboards falling, and some power lines exploding as well. Rescues fueled even the tiniest of hopes for those looking desperately for their loved ones. But the calamity is expected to claim more lives in the coming days, with many feared buried alive. A group of Israeli companies have been deployed in Turkey to make their advanced technology available to rescue teams. State-of-the-art tech ranging from thermal imagery to drones are being used to map out inaccessible areas. Now, the situation in Syria is graver than Turkey. Atareb, a town in rural Aleppo, has endured years of war and is now scarred by a new wave of destruction. Non-emergency medical services have been suspended. Healthcare is already stretched thin and dependent on foreign aid. For most, their only source of income is now gone. Some have 8 to 10 mouths to feed per family. But hope still floats as the United Nations' Humanitarian Affairs Chief, Martin Griffiths, met with Syria's President Bashar al-Assad after visiting Aleppo. Assad has agreed to open 2 new crossing points from Turkey to the rebel-held northwest Syria to allow aid to reach. Tens of thousands have been left homeless in freezing cold conditions in a country that has already been devastated by 12 years of civil war. Some have not received any aid at all. Women and children are lining up in the hopes of getting some aid boxes, but they're often met with disappointment. Meanwhile, a parallel rescue effort is also underway. Volunteers from Turkey's Animal Rights Federation are working around the clock to try and save animals from under the rubble of abandoned buildings. But those working to find and care for pets are also struggling to feed them. There is an acute lack of food, bird food, chicken feed, or anything in any pet shop at the moment. On the other hand, the United Nations World Food Programme has scaled up its emergency assistance. Food is now reaching to over 300,000 quake-affected people in both the countries. Hot meals and ready-to-eat rations are being provided to the victims. But even as aid and relief reaches a quake-hit Turkey and Syria, one must also be aware of donation scams that have come to light. Scammers are using the earthquakes to trick people into donating to fake causes. It's easy for hackers and fraudsters at a time when the entire world is sympathizing with Turkey and Syria to fool people. Scammers are using legitimate links to trustworthy payment platforms even to make their trick look convincing. It's a zero-effort ploy that often brings monetary benefits to con artists and not the actual victims. Captions like "Pray for Turkey," "Donate for Turkey" are being used heavily on the internet. Some are using distressing videos, some posting a photo of a child running in front of a dystopian background with the caption, "Please help achieve this goal." So please do donate and help those in need, but be careful of all the scamsters around. Moving on. Days after Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was seen lobbying with the West to get weapons and European Union membership, Russia has upped its ante in its invasion of Ukraine. In the latest, only 10 days to the completion of the year since the invasion began, and the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut is witnessing another major Russian offensive. The 14th offensive since the war began, as Russian forces continue heavy shelling and infantry attacks. At least 5 civilians have been killed and many have been wounded in just the last 24 hours. Positions in Bakhmut have been fortified with only military people being allowed inside the city. There are also reports of Russian shelling along the front lines and bombardment of at least 16 settlements near the city. Meanwhile, NATO chief feels that Russia's so-called spring offensive might have already begun.
На Донецком направлении добровольцы, что
In the Donetsk direction, the volunteers of the assault detachments, with fire support from the missile forces and artillery of the southern group of troops, liberated the settlement of Krasnohora of the Donetsk People's Republic.
And finally, it is Valentine's Day, a day for flowers and bouquets, but in the Philippines, it has become a day for the cauliflower instead of the flower, for that matter any vegetable, instead of flowers. First, a bride was seen choosing red onions over flowers for her wedding bouquet because that's how high the prices of vegetables are in the Philippines. They're costlier than meat and a thing to show off. And now Filipinos are choosing vegetable bouquets over flower bouquets for Valentine's Day. While the world is lost in the romantic ideal of love, people in the Philippines have made up their minds to be a little more practical. They're giving flowers the pass because it ends up in bins anyway, after a day or two at least. Flower shops are making it convenient for people by selling bouquets made of vegetables that can, of course, be later used for preparing meals, unlike flower bouquets. Creating food diaries with your Valentine by cooking meals together is never really a bad option. This unique idea was welcomed by the people of the Philippines, and they chose bouquets of red chilies and onions rather than red roses. And that's all we have time for in this edition of Around the World. Thank you so much for watching. Keep it with News 9 Plus.